Hey y'all, it's Jordan or JorWish and welcome to or back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be interviewing the founder of Premier LSAT Prep, which is a tutoring company for the LSAT that is super affordable and you all should totally check them out. When I was studying for the LSAT, I really wanted to get a tutor, but I couldn't afford it. All the ones that I saw were like crazy amounts an hour, like $200 to $300 an hour. And Premier LSAT Prep is $60 an hour. I know a lot of y'all have been DMing me questions about, LSAT tips and things like that. I will be the first to tell you, I'm not an expert on the exam. I didn't do the best on it either. So I think that it's best to get information from an LSAT tutor himself. So without further ado, let's get right into the video and I'll have all the information if you want to get in contact. So without further ado, let's get right into the video. Hey, Jake, if you want to just introduce yourself for my channel.
Sure. Thanks for having me. My name's Jake. I am the founder and tutor at Premier LSAT Prep. We're a LSAT prep company that focuses on primarily on one-on-one tutoring, and we're all about getting people to as high a score as they possibly can and doing it at an affordable rate.
Okay, so we just have some questions for you.
Sure.
So first is, what was your LSAT studying experience like?
Yeah, my LSAT studying experience was long. I started off taking a diagnostic. I started off at a 140. I had it in my head that I wanted to get into the 170s. So scoring 140 was kind of upsetting to start out with, especially because I had been hearing that I could only really, increase my score by 10, 12, maybe 12 points or something like that. So I took a class and that got me a few more points. That class took around 3 months or so. But when I was done with the class, I still was not at a score that I was really happy with. And so I just kept on studying on my own for a few months. I got myself up to, kind of a score that I was feeling pretty good about, in the 170s. And then I took the exam. I didn't do as well as I wanted to. I kind of got, screwed up a little bit on the logic game section. So I had to take it again. So I took a short break, started studying again for a couple months, and then took it that final time and got, 174. So I started off, really low at that 140, but, it kind of took a lot of kind of figuring it all out to get myself up to that 174. And even even getting there was not a smooth process, right? It took me a long time, took taking that class and then, kind of figuring out methods on my own that were going to be the best methods to help me get up to that goal score. And finally, I got there after, around 6 months or so.
Yeah, it's definitely always a journey.
Yeah, absolutely.
So how long do you recommend studying for the exam?
Yeah, it's a good question. So like I said, I studied for around 6 months. I think everyone is different, right? I had a friend who took the exam like summer before I did. And he studied for 3 months and didn't, he was like traveling during the summer at the time while he was studying, and he took the exam after 3 months and he got a 174, the same score that I ended up with. But it took him, 3 months of casual studying basically to get to that score. But it took me 6 months of intense studying to get to that same score. So everyone's a little different. Some people it comes really intuitively, some people it doesn't, right? And so I think the minimum that it takes most people, what I suggest to most people is take 3 months minimum. But if you need more time, right, you can absolutely still take that time. I would say after 8 months or so, I feel like it's hard to kind of stay motivated. So I would, if you're planning on when should I take the exam, I would say probably try to aim for fewer than 8 months from now. But if you find, maybe you're someone who's maybe you're 6 months into your studying and you're still not, at your goal, don't worry, right? You still got, you're still capable of getting there, even if it's been a while for you. So yeah, I would say anywhere from 3 to 8 months is a good kind of schedule.
Okay, yeah, it can be hard to plan it out, and I think it's good to
Definitely.
aim for Shorter, but with a cushion time period.
Definitely. I get some people who call me or talk to me, and they're like, "Oh, I'm a freshman in college. Like, I want to start studying now." And I'm like,
Well,
you should take your time. You don't need to be studying for 3 years to do well on this exam.
what's your best advice for each of the sections?
I kind of break the sections down by like two factors. One, how intuitive they are, and how learnable it is. And you'll see it's kind of like those two factors are kind of like the inverse of one another. So what I mean by that is like the logic game section. I find most people think that it's the least intuitive section, right? But most people in most cases it's also the most learnable section, right? So I personally, and I've worked with plenty of people who started off not understanding logic games at all, but were able to bring their score to to -0, perfect score on the logic game section. And the best way to do that is just by taking as many games as you can and reviewing games that you get wrong. So if you took a game, you got a question or two wrong, or maybe you just didn't know the best way to set it up, figure out the best way to approach it, and then take that game again the next day, right? And keep on doing that process over and over and over again until you feel like you've totally mastered the game. That's how you learn how to do these games, and that's how you can end up getting seeing a game on the actual test, and you're like, oh, I memorized this game because it looks exactly like a game that I did a couple months ago. So that's my best advice for the logic game section. I think the next section kind of underneath that in terms of intuitiveness would be the logical reasoning section. I think the logical reasoning section is decently intuitive, but there's still a lot of stuff that's kind of tough about it. A lot of that's kind of unintuitive. Not only is it second in intuitiveness, but it's also second in learnability. So there's just like we've got a ton of strategies to learn logic games, we've got a ton of strategies to learn logical reasoning. And you want to make sure that when you're learning logical reasoning, you're going through question type by question type and learning each of the techniques for each question type, because each question type requires its own approach. So it's definitely not an one size fits all approach for logical reasoning. You gotta learn how to approach a weakened question versus a necessary assumption question versus a must be true question. All these things are really essential to making sure that you learn the most on logical reasoning. The last section, right, the most intuitive section and the least learnable is the reading comprehension section. Reading comprehension can be, I find most people, it starts out as their favorite, right? It's what you're most used to doing. If you're an English major or a political science major or something like that in college, that section is going to come pretty naturally to you. But most of the people that I work with, it starts out as their favorite section, ends up as their least favorite section. Because like I said, with these other sections, you can learn them really well. With reading comprehension, it can be really tough to increase your score. Not to say that you can't learn it at all, but it's really hard to kind of get your score up in a systematic way like you can on logical reasoning or logic games. And so the best way that I found to increase your score on reading comprehension is just to do more reading comprehension, right? A lot of people will say, oh, read The Economist, read the New York Times, something like that. I say just, there are plenty of reading comprehension sections out there. Just do more of them, right? Do one a day, right? And do as many as you can until you, start recognizing patterns that show up. You start, it starts feeling more natural. You'll see like, the way that the LSAT authors work. You'll learn how their methods, right? Things like one thing that you might learn through this process that that I personally identified when I was doing this was something that happens a lot is the very last question of the reading comprehension section will be asking you to recall the very first paragraph of the passage, right? So if you're reading through that last question, you might think like, where the heck is this coming from? But if you just look at the very first paragraph, oftentimes, you'll see that that's where the answer is coming from. And so those kinds of insights are only really possible if you are, if you've done a bunch of reading comprehension in the past.
So how can someone make sure they score as high as possible?
I wholeheartedly believe that anyone is capable of getting as high a score on the exam as they want, provided that they have the right amount of time and the right resources. The right amount of time, we talked about that earlier. That's pretty easy, right? The right resources, though, is really, really important as well, right? Because there are a lot of resources out there, I think that, there are a lot of resources out there, period. There are a lot of good resources out there, but there are also a lot of resources that are maybe not, not necessarily the best. And so I think when trying to figure out what your plan is going to be for how to improve your score, you want to make sure that if you have the resources, take a class, or preferably even better, work with a tutor one-on-one who's seen all of these, who's seen exactly like what you've gone through and knows how to get up to your goal score. I see way too many people, I think, who fall into two categories. One, there are people who start off by they'll just try to study on their own, read through a book, and there are plenty of good books out there. But if you're just going through a book on your own, it's possible, and I've seen it happen a lot, where you just end up developing bad habits, right? Where, you might get a grasp on some of the material, but a lot of doing really well in the LSAT comes down to making sure that you have really good habits. And so if you develop bad habits, right, you might be limiting yourself in terms of, the highest score that you can get. That's one thing that I see a lot, right? People start off by self-studying and they end up with bad habits, which then it takes a little bit of time to like unlearn those and get yourself back on track. The other thing, which is maybe even more unfortunate, is I talk to a lot of people who work with certain prep courses that are just not up to snuff, right? That don't teach the material in the best way or in the most conducive way to learning. And so they, put all this money into a class and then end up with the same score that they started out with. When you're considering your options, right, you just want to make sure that you're feeling confident about the option that you're going with. You don't want to waste time, trying to learn something that might not be the best way to approach the exam, or, like I said, develop bad habits if you're just self-studying. Summarize, basically, right time and the right resources. That's going to get you to your goal score.
Okay, for sure. I definitely agree.
Yeah.
So what do you think makes a good LSAT tutor?
A good LSAT tutor is someone who knows what you're going through, right? I talk to a lot of people who work with tutors who are, naturals at the exam, right? People who got really, really high scores, but they score, their diagnostic was super high, right? It just comes naturally to them. And that's more power to them. But I don't think that that's the most conducive thing to being like a great tutor, right? Because you don't necessarily know the best way, to explain it, or you can't really empathize with how, how difficult some of this material can really be. And so I think the best tutors out there are those people who started off with a really low score and did eventually bring themselves up to that 99th percentile score, but having started from the 140s or 130s even, right, they know what it takes to get up to improve your score as high as to as high as the 170s. And so that's why like me and all the tutors that I work with at Premier LSAT Prep, all of them, we make sure not only are they in the 99th percentile, but that they're started off in the in a lower score, so they know what it takes. They know what's required to get to that high score.
Oh, that's really good, and that's a good point. I think
so.
Yeah. So I guess, can you tell us a little bit more about Premier LSAT Prep?
Yeah, so I've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but the two things that we feel really are important are making sure your tutor is someone who started off, like I said, low score. They know what it takes to bring themselves up to a high score. And the other really important thing, I think, is affordability, because there are a lot of tutors out there who charge like very high rates. It's $150 an hour. I've seen plenty of people that are even higher, right? We try to keep our rates as low as possible, because not everyone has the ability, right, to pay that sums of money. And the LSAT is such an important exam, it can save you tons of money, but if you get a high enough score, right, you can get tons of scholarships. And so try to make sure that we keep it affordable, keeping it at that $60 an hour rate, so that, anyone, or as many people as possible can have access to this kind of knowledge, so that you can improve your score as much as possible. Because like I said, it's really hard to get to get yourself to a really high score if you're not working with a tutor. And so we try to make sure that that option is available to as many people as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to be on your channel.
Thank you. Okay, y'all, thank you so much for watching. And yeah, I'll see you on the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.